and welcome to our panel where we will be discussing, those are our names, we'll be discussing what is next for hypercasual and social games in general. So we have a wide range of panelists, but first I'll introduce myself. My name is Cowley. I am the editor of PocketGamer.biz, and yeah, I write about the games that y'all make, so please feel free to introduce yourselves. Oh, so you've got a mic.
Okay, works, perfect. Okay, so hi, nice to meet you guys. My name is Krug. I'm COO and co-founder of Softgames. We're a 100-people studio, fully focused on HTML5 social games, and I'm super excited to be here today.
Very good. If I could just borrow the mic.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Tom Van Dam. I work for ByteDance, which, among other products, runs TikTok, perhaps our most well-known product in the West. I've lived in China for 11 years. I'm based there. Previously 6 years at NetEase, so a lot of China-related questions you can send my way. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Christie. I'm founder and chief exec of Neon Play. We're 10 years old this year. Our first game was Filipp Football. We launched in 2010. We had Paper Glider, Traffic Panic, and last year we had a big game called Roller Splat, which Voodoo published. We're now publishing more of our own stuff in the idle genre. Two recent ones are Idle Tap Strongman and Idle Tap Airport.
That's on to me now. Hey, I'm Jake. I'm a publishing manager at Kwalee, who are a hyper-casual developer and publisher. So we're working with developers from the point of submission, coaching them to kind of understand more about how hyper-casual works and what it is, and then scaling up these games to make them hits.
Oh yeah. Hello, my name is Filipp. Karmanov. I'm a CEO and founder of Snowflake Games. We're focused on HTML5 mobile-first games since 2013, and to this date we have developed and published more than 60 games on different platforms, and we're always looking for new opportunities as well.
Cool, sorry. I was just checking the time. So, we've got a wide range of people and a wide range of colours. Thank you for coordinating that before you came. So I figured we'd start off with something sort of general that I think everyone can answer. Smartphones and mobile devices, they're getting more and more advanced. We're seeing hugely powerful games coming to the small screens. We've got like Rome Total War, that kind of thing. So why are players still turning to smaller titles like the ones that you all develop? Just start from here and go down the line, I guess.
I think in general, it always depends on the market you're addressing. We're fully focusing on female games. So we focus on games specifically for an older female audience. And those players are not specifically looking for the AAA experience. They're not looking to play the next Call of Duty or GTA or whatever. They just want to have a good time. And ideally, they also want to play with their friends. You know, this is where social gaming comes into place. And therefore, I believe it's always a question, what is the market you're trying to address? And then fitting the right games to that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's, as games on mobile get more and more complex, the time to onboard a player into the experience and the time to learn and get fun out of the product gets longer and longer. And hyper-casual, shortened that time significantly. You open the app and you can start playing without too much learning. And I think that's the big appeal for many people.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just trying to attract the widest audience, and AAA becomes more niche, and just a wider, bigger audience with some quite clean graphics where baddies and goodies are very clearly defined. It's much better. We've tried games where we've got a very low CPI with very, very basic graphics, and we thought people like this, so let's try and adapt it and make it more beautiful, and actually it got a worse CPI. So simple is often the best for a very wide male, female, young, old audience.
Yeah, I think everyone's made some really pertinent points about console-style games on mobile and the kind of audience for them. I think a lot of it's about time as well. People who are typically playing hyper-casual games don't have a huge amount of time to do it. They're like on the bus or in the middle of something. And it's, again, you can just jump into quite quickly, have a quick play while you've got time, and then move on to the next thing.
Well, as Jake said just before me, despite the fact that there is a huge amount of mobile users in the world at the moment, most of them are not so hardcore gamers and are preferred to play something simple as well, because there are many people who are not primarily gaming, who don't play a lot and who want to see something simple to kill their time on the way to the friends and so on. So hypercasual fits this niche very perfectly.
Cool. and sort of keeping something for everybody that they can answer before we break down into smaller parts. And looking ahead, we've seen sort of bigger developers moving into hypercasual and social games, but I'm wondering about big brands and licenses, because we're seeing all them. We've got like Marvel getting into games and stuff like that, but there's not really been hypercasual Marvel games. So are we going to see big brands and licenses coming into this space at all, or is there room for that, or are we going to see these smaller, like, original IP is that better suited for hypercasual and social in general? Anyone want to?
I mean, personally, our experience with doing hypercasual is that A, there's not enough margin for licenses and brands. B, they work too slowly. If you had to get every ad approved by a license or a brand, you'd be dead within days. And I don't think they quite get it, and then it's not nimble enough to do it. And also, there's so much testing, prototyping, failing. You know, there's such a high fail rate. A brand or a license wouldn't accept that. And yes, they bring obviously the name and the marketing, but I just think it just wouldn't work. I'll be proved wrong, obviously, but
I think there's also only so far you'd be able to go with a kind of branded or licensed hyper-casual game, because hyper-casual is ultimately about capturing the widest audience possible, and even if it's a really strong brand, using that brand kind of limits your audience to fans of that brand and other people that are kind of engaged by their gameplay.
I think I have a slightly different opinion. First of all, is of course how you define hyper-casual, and I think that has quite a wide band. And I do agree with your point that big IP licensors would take a long time to get on board. But now that hyper-casual has taken off in the current fashion, and big brands see that there's a lot of money to be made, there's a bigger willingness to be flexible, and you see that intellectual property licenses are more broadly provided to developers, and saying like, I don't give you the license for a single game, but I might give you the license and you can try for 3 months or 6 months to build a prototype with good KPIs and then reach a bigger audience. And if it doesn't work in 6 months, okay, we'll cut the deal, but until those 6 months are up, you've got a pretty high degree of freedom to work with.
Have any brands or licenses succeeded in hyper-casual that you know yet?
I think there's a lot coming, but we're not seeing too much yet.
I thought about this question in another way. And what about that hyper-casual games can be used as part of marketing strategy for non-gaming products? For example, imagine marketing a brand new Hollywood movie and hyping the audience with a very simple viral game with these movies IPs. There is plenty of space for experiments in this field, and in fact it's another topic to be discussed, but just think about this.
I think I do agree with Jake and Ollie here. I mean, the question is always, why do we want to go for an IP? Ultimately, I think there's a lot of misconception here, because a lot of people always thought having an IP on board would lower their CPI. But then once again, which was already named, is it's narrowing down your target group so much that it potentially even increases your CPI. So I agree with you guys here. Sorry.
No. I think
so it's 3 against 1.
But there are different opinions, and again, the definition of hyper-casual, right? If you're talking about really simple gameplay, then perhaps it's a little bit harder. But I think there are a lot of games, and I personally define hyper-casual usually as, can it be exclusively monetized with ads? And if it can, then it falls into the space. And I think there are some examples of big Western IP holders that have made such games, which ad monetize. And have made a good amount of money with it. And some of these IPs are obviously stronger than others. Some of the board game IPs or those evergreen IPs that have been around for 30 years, say for example Tom and Jerry, they are able to capture such wide audiences and deliver still significant numbers without too much added cost that you could probably make a profitable project with it, from my perspective.
So kind of on that note, because you're saying like your definition of hyper-casual is it can be monetized only through ads, that's sort of what you
that's what I use.
So I guess what's everybody else's opinion? What are your opinions on hyper-casual? Like we've seen hyper-casual sort of evolving in terms of game mechanics. So Arch Hero, I think it's called, is something more like a hybrid casual game because it plays like a hyper-casual game, but it has a strong sense of progression. Like, is that still hyper-casual to you, or is there a point at which you're going to add too much to a game that it stops being hyper-casual and starts being something wholly different?
Well,
I think Archer, the example you gave, it's kind of like it's more like a casual game that's marketed like a hyper-casual game. Like they've kind of seen that trend and learned how it works and used that to their advantage to kind of push a more casual game. I think hyper-casual as a kind of vertical is always pretty much going to be ad monetized.
Yeah. We'll probably see and already seeing some changes in the hyper-casual genre, but I don't think that's a bad thing, since it's pretty natural for things to slowly change to something new, especially in mobile industry, where everything, but if not everything, but that many things are based on experiments and iterations. For example, would you see that some hyper-casual games, some casual games like Netflix will be advertised like hyper-casual games with the same style of ads? I think that it was reached as an experiment and seeing the hyper-casual success. So I think that it will change, the genres will eventually merge, maybe something, and so on.
Yeah, I mean Archer is not a hyper-casual game. It's a super casual, whatever you want to call it, because it's obviously got a much deeper meta game than a normal hyper-casual game. The challenge for the hyper-casual market is it's getting harder. Margins are getting tighter, CPIs are rising, retention is diminishing, and as a result it's becoming very tricky. So hyper-casual developers and publishers are going to need to try and find ways to eke out a longer, higher LTV so that you can have that bandwidth of the CPI to acquire more users but still keep the profitability there.
Sorry, my leg was going dead. And thanks, Oscar, for throwing me under the bus with that Arch Hero one, because it was his suggestion. So we kind of touched on it before, that advertising is going to remain sort of the main method of hyper-casual, and obviously your belief that it can only be advertised by, yeah, you know what I'm saying. Is there room for other models of hang on.
Digital.
Monetization is the word I'm going for. It's written down in front of me. Is there room for other monetization options? Is there in-app purchases? Is that even a thing that's going to happen in hyper-casual? Or is that just completely out of the question for a hyper-casual game?
I think we've already seen this over the past year. I mean, at the beginning there was only advertisement-based monetization, right? And in the last year we've seen games which have introduced subscription channels, right? So to just offer this additional skin, which I really want to have and cannot get, as well as in-app purchase. So I believe at the end of the day, a lot of developers, due to the reasons which were just mentioned, are going to have to go with subscription, with in-app purchase, to just increase the LTV, because they're not going to be able to compete anymore. So I think there's just a natural transition we're in right now, and I do expect to see much more of that one.
Yeah, if you don't have IAP, I think you're going to die, to be honest, in the next year. You need to try and aim out a thought for 30% of your revenue through IAP, realistically, because ads, yes, will be there, but you're going to need that margin of IAP to be able to sustain the CPIs.
Yeah. And actually, adding to what Ollie said, sorry, it's actually, I believe that as long as the core stays hyper-casual and the meta layer becomes more casual, then the developers would be fine. It wouldn't be the other way around. So I don't believe it's casual games being marketed as hyper-casual, but it's actually the hyper-casual core with the added meta layer of a casual plus. That's how I see it. But
yeah, so you're moving away a little bit from the hyper-casual, right? Because if you add a subscription or you add IAP, you automatically increase the commitment required from a user to, engage with the game. And you could argue, is that still hyper-casual? Because, the tendency to flip between different games decreases, right? So this is why my definition of hyper-casual remains ad-based only, because else you're getting into that casual space automatically.
Yeah, I think for a long time to come, it's going to be primarily ad-based revenue for hyper-casual games.
Yes, since there is no clear definition of what hyper-casual is, everybody is thinking something about this shown by himself. So I think that it's the right thing to maybe agree with Tom here, because for most of hyper-casual is simple game which is monetized primarily via advertising, so it will stay the same, I think.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit away from getting the users and the actual games themselves. There's sort of, I remember there was a list of like 14 different genres of hyper-casual that there actually are, and everyone's kind of sticking to those. Are we going to see changes in the types of genres in games, or are those sort of the established things that every hyper-casual developer should be going for? Jake, I think I'll start with you on the spot.
Yeah, this is my favourite thing about the hyper-casual space in general, and it's the fact that like it kind of spans genres, and you can have any kind of concept become a hyper-casual game. Like when you think you understand what a hyper-casual game is and the kind of core genres that you can use, somebody comes along and makes a game that kind of completely breaks the mold and is something completely new. So there's lots of space for innovation with indie developers that are just working on these kind of small prototypes and testing them out. And you see what works, see what people find appealing from those games. And that brings in completely new concepts that you didn't think would be a game when you were first starting out.
I think the key is just to test and innovate, and if you don't innovate and just copycat, you're never going to have success, really. I mean, when we worked with Voodoo very closely, they said don't do puzzle games because puzzle games would just never work in hyper-casual space. And then we came up with this idea called Roller Splat, and it's had 55 million downloads. And they were so surprised that it had such sustained CPI and retention, but it did, and it's almost created its own sort of hyper puzzle sort of genre. So you just never know. You just need to create a good idea and just go with it.
Anybody else? Thoughts?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agree. Nothing to add, so.
And I've already asked that question. God almighty. So obviously, user acquisition for hyper-casual games as mostly through ads in other games and that kind of thing, I believe. Are we going to see any changes to that, or is it just going to cost too much? We're not. I think Ollie was saying before when we were talking about it that we're not going to see big TV ads for a hyper-casual game because the margins are too small. Does anyone else think that maybe there will be? I don't know. Is it going to get big enough as an industry that we will see developers like Voodoo or whoever just putting their games on at the Super Bowl, or that kind of thing?
Potentially as a branding exercise, but I just think with TV you can't track, and we know that every single ad that we all try, we are tracking everything from the click-through rate, the CPI, the session, the view length of an ad. So that's going to be the mainstream way because it's just so trackable, and we need to just really keep an eye on every cent we're spending on ads. But who knows, influencers could come there, but it's very unproven. I think once that becomes much more trackable, that'll be more interesting. But yeah, I think ads will be the prime way.
Yeah, I agree with the influencer part. I think influencers are another big part, and this depends a little bit on the territory that you're operating in. It also depends on perhaps the platforms that you're operating on. Some platforms have integrated features where you can actually track the performance of the influencers that you're using. You can even simply show, the array of influencers, like this is the performance that I'm getting from my game, and you could potentially get paid on the basis of how much traffic you are generating directly. So it also depends on platform support, and I think that we'll see a lot of the platforms that are engaged with games at the moment move towards more integrated approaches on how can we combine all those celebrities and influencers on the platforms with the actual ad campaigns for hyper-casual and other games.
But a game's got to have long-term, it's got to have 3, 4, 5, 6 months tail to have the long-term viability, and I think an influence campaign might be a little bit spiky and you need a little bit more longevity.
Yeah. And this is more of a personal question because we've always struggled with it as journalists to try and cover hyper-casual and social games because we just don't know what to do with them. From your perspective, obviously influencers aren't ready yet, but is there a place for traditional games press and games media to be involved in hyper-casual to talk about it? What can we do anything
Why
to talk about it?
Why can't you do anything with them?
Because they're so short and so simple that writing a review or tips or anything like that is just, there's not much to it. So, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, I guess?
I mean, a game is not going to be made or broke, I'm afraid, by a review in a paper or a magazine or a website. It's nice to get it, but we're trying to target millions and millions of players globally.
Sure.
So personally, it's not something we would chase. We wouldn't even chase Apple features so much anymore, whereas they used to be the holy grail where you would know you get 1 million downloads. Now it will provide a little blip, and it's very nice. It's some free UA, but really it's just having a great ad, great game, strong CPI, long retention, and the game has to survive on its own without the help of too many outsiders.
Nods of agreement all around there, yeah.
Well, I have one additional point to make. I think that what we're seeing, at least maybe more on the Asian side, is once you had that initial massive spike as a hyper-casual game, that the developer then goes to work and turns the game into a regular casual game, creating a much longer tail and relying more on external media or other ways to...
Within the same game, or is it
the same game? So, the original game would be fairly simple and add-only, and then features get added, making it more into, maybe even some role-playing, or there's an idle element to it, or so that, those players that originally came in and that are very interested in the core mechanic can keep playing it for a very long time, and that sort of transitions the targeting for marketing as well to a more specific audience rather than a wide funnel.
I actually think there is a huge opportunity for the media to cover social games, to also cover this aspect a little bit, because right now there is nobody doing that, and what a lot of people tend to forget is, there are hundreds of millions of people playing everyday social games. They are watching social videos. There is nobody covering this. So everybody is focusing on the hyper-casual, on the native, whatsoever, while forgetting that, like I said, for example, we're a privately owned 100 people company. Yeah, we've grown in the past 2 years from basically 20 people to 100 people, and without any investors' money. So this would not have been possible in the native app store, most likely.
I think, to be honest, there's a snobism about hyper-casual games, that a lot of people think they're shitty little games, but actually to make a great, successful hyper-casual games is very, very hard. And I think a lot of journalists, tell me I'm wrong, are more hardcore gamers, and they just look at these things and go, is that it? But actually to get to that, is that it, is incredibly tricky, and it takes a lot of hard work. And when you look at the weekly videos that Voodoo do, analysing games and why it makes a success, and it's fascinating actually, really deep diving into the psychology of hyper-casual games and the contrast of colour, the reward, the visuals, the words. It's absolutely fascinating, and I do think journalists could actually do a lot more to truly analyse what makes a great game.
Okay, cool.
There you go.
Now I know. Thank you. This is just free market research. Tom, you mentioned obviously China, and that's a big market. And if you're pushing out to other markets, it's obviously in traditional games and more advanced games, not advanced. You know what I mean? They would try. There was a big push to go to China, and then there was obviously the big freeze out, and that's proven a problem. Should hyper-casual and social developers still be aiming for China? Because obviously there's a huge market there, but the difficulty of getting in, is that too much to stop Western developers from getting in, or should they keep trying?
Well, it's a very interesting situation because you mentioned a big freeze. So China has had a huge freeze on approvals. You need a government license to get your game to market. And this has, cancelled a lot of past partnerships that there were between Western developers and Chinese publishers. But actually for hyper-casual, and by my definition of ad-only, currently, and this is also for indeterminate amount of time still, do not need a government license to go to market. And this presents an amazing opportunity while the door is open. It's a bit of a gray area, but most companies are willing to engage with it. So, that barrier that exists for traditional developers with IAP purchases and having to get that government license, find a partner locally to do it for them, that barrier is not there or less there. And then the problem simply becomes how do you acquire enough traffic and monetize effectively. eCPMs in China are generally much higher than in the West, so it could be very beneficial, but you still probably want to find a partner that can drive that traffic for you, and there are a lot of options for that. I'm not here to do advertisement at the moment, but there are options, so you should definitely look into that, and there are lots of big successes also from Western developers in China.
It is a really hard market to get into, though. I mean, we're trying. We've spoken to lots of Chinese publishers about trying to find the right publisher, and there's such a myriad. You just don't know where to start, to be honest. And in fact, we just had a meeting with TikTok before this. Even just advertising your game in China, in most of the rest of the world, you would just do 15 seconds of gameplay, put harder than it looks at the top, or noob versus pro, and you've got an ad which will work. But in China, you need to do video, you've got to do TikTok, and suddenly that's a budget thing. It's a different market. It's a real challenge. One we all want to crack, but it's not easy.
Yeah, it's a massive kind of market, but it's really fragmented, and it's kind of essential to get find a partner that you can work with that kind of knows the space and understands how to make it work and how to monetize effectively and acquire effectively.
Okay, cool. And one other thing before I've got time before we open the floor is, Ollie, you're sort of an indie developer in the hyper-casual space because you're not owned by anybody. And that's kind of rare because a lot of the hyper-casual games and social games that we see, well, hyper-casual mostly, is from big publishers like Kwalee, like Softgames, like Voodoo, and so on and so forth. Is there going to be room for indies? I'm not asking if you're going to shut down in 5 years, but is there going to be like space for indie developers still to work in the space with all these other publishers coming in and taking up and dominating the space as they are?
It's definitely a massive challenge because the learnings to get your own UA team and your own monetization team is tricky. And we've spent the last year doing it. We're now fairly well established at doing that, and we now know what we're doing. But to get to that stage is a lot of time, money, spending a lot of money on UA, and you don't want to blow 50 grand a day if it's going in the wrong place. So it's possible. There's more automation of tools within all the UA and monetization channels, which will make it easier over the next year or two, definitely. The big publishers are fantastic, but their margins are getting smaller, and therefore the money that indies are getting from the publishers is also diminishing. So I think it will go more towards the indie side, and that's why companies like Voodoo are acquiring other studios so they can bring as much in-house as opposed to relying on external people.
I was quite excited about this question because as a publishing manager, I'm reviewing kind of submissions every day from a bunch of different developers all over the world, and I'm kind of seeing that indie space in those submissions. Like a lot of these developers are small studios or independent people that are just kind of working in their bedroom and making a little game, a little prototype that we can test and play. And kind of part of why they're working with a publisher and getting that coaching is exactly that, is to get that coaching and kind of build that understanding of the hyper-casual space, because you need the backing of a publisher or somebody who's got that expertise and a team that can support you in acquiring users and scaling your game.
Well, I was just thinking, like, indie, independent developer. What is the level of independence, that you would maintain, right? I'd say partnering up for UA and some publishing doesn't, diminish your independence in that sense. And I think the agility of indies to, remain efficient and, create a lot of new, unique titles, I think, is key for a lot of big companies, big publishers in the space to survive in the first place. Because, with the big teams and big company politics in some cases, there's just not enough efficiency, and indies are the solution to, keep your portfolio rich in offer.
Yeah, you do need the big budgets in the credit line. You could be spending hundreds of thousands of pounds a month, and not many companies can do that.
Cool. I'd like to open up to the audience for any questions. I know Oscar's probably got 1,000, but if anybody else has some that they want to ask before we let Oscar just run the show.
I was going to chuck one at you quickly, so people have time to think. In response to the last question around kind of publisher versus indie, the comment was made about UA and on those sort of things. With the kind of slight increase in the interest of people trying to offer UA funding, does that change the dynamic? Because there is a bunch of people out there starting to offer UA factoring and UA funding specifically. Does that mean there's more scope for indies?
I think factoring in general has been there for quite some time. It's just becoming more popular because CPIs are increasing. More indie developers are trying to enter the market. We're trying to stay independent from bigger publishers because they don't have the contacts or they just want to remain an indie developer. So I believe factoring can be a very powerful tool, but at the end of the day, it doesn't come cost-free. Everything in life always has a price tag, and this one can be quite heavy, depending on the size of your company. So do I believe if it's a good tool? Sure. Does it fit for everyone to now spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a day? I don't think so.
I think there's also a challenge of kind of finding someone with those expertise, whereas publishers are kind of set up with teams that are already working on this, and it's their day job, like they're day-to-day managing user acquisition and monetization for these types of games. So they've got that experience, they've got that knowledge and that understanding, and I think just getting funding, there's going to be a challenge with understanding that UA process and getting it right. But it's an interesting space.
It's what Ollie was saying earlier. You've taken time to build up that expertise, and I think that. So I think it's really invaluable and important. But I think you're right. It comes at a cost. Is it something that will work in a casual space as opposed to hyper casual? Probably more likely, because the finesse of getting the lowest possible cost is so much more important in hyper casual, I would argue. Does that make sense? Yes. So, there's one over here. I'll just I'll give you a microphone.
Yes. Thank you.
As you say, hyper-casual is almost defined by its agility and speed in getting things to market and iterated and tested quickly. Do you think that it remains best served by app stores for its deployment approach, or do you think perhaps even more agile, faster technologies like HTML and those kind of aggregation platforms could be a better way for hyper-casual content?
Go on, you go.
Well, I sort of heard you. Were you saying go on the app stores and the HTML5 as well?
Well, yeah, basically being able to use HTML just because it's so fast to bring to market even faster. And I think the other point that was raised about restrictions in markets, obviously going through app stores means their approval processes, and again, HTML kind of circumvents some of that.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, Google Play, there's no approval process, so you can do that straight away, and I'd argue that Unity is as fast as HTML5. We're doing prototypes in days. We'd want to be testing a CPI test within 3 to 5 days. With Roller Splat, we launched it with 6 levels only, so you don't need to create a 100-level game to test. You want to just test as quickly as you can. I think that's the key. Be nimble, be agile, don't be too perfect, and worry about beautiful effects. A player, when they see an ad on Instagram or Facebook, will very quickly realise whether they want to play it and download it or not. And you don't need 100 levels to do that. So just quick iteration, test quickly, fail quickly is the key before you actually worry about your app store or your HTML5.
When it comes, for example, for the social gaming platforms, because you were referring to that as well, I would always try to be careful putting both native games and formerly called instant games into one bucket, because it's two completely separate products here at the end of the day. For example, we're really good on instant games or social HTML5 game platforms, but we're not good on native stores because it's two completely separate platforms.
Google Play have introduced an approval thing, just by the way. They've started doing it and it's a right pain. And so does Facebook Instance, they have an approval thing as well. I was wondering about TikTok. Is TikTok thinking about going into an instant games platform as well, merged into TikTok? Because that'd be quite good.
I can't speak to that publicly. Find me if you are interested in our company. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sorry, I do need to sneak in one more question that Andre has politely reminded me that I promised to ask. On the topic of social gaming, and in the way it's already sort of evolved in its own way, we did used to know it as instant gaming. We've heard a lot about Facebook Instant Games today. Why do you think that platforms now have changed to this whole idea of social gaming rather than just instant gaming, and that is directed directly at you?
Yeah. I think it's important to understand that Facebook games or instant games, it has just been there for 2 years, right? Now Snapchat also joined recently. Why do those big companies do that? Obviously because they're increasing retention of the players, they can monetize them. They're just trying to establish this great ecosystem, what is currently monopolized by the app stores. So I do believe that even though, which cannot be spoken publicly here, that we will see more players entering the market because the benefits are very clear for it.
But it's interesting that we've seen this before with Line and Kakao years and years ago, and that didn't grow at that time. And I'm wondering whether it's because, for example, HTML5 wasn't as settled, or whatever the delivery mechanism at the time wasn't settled.
Back then, there was a technology called Flashlight, for example. I think that one you're referring to, and by doing, getting the shiverings, this is exactly the cause. Because Flashlight, once again, didn't run everywhere. You needed a plug-in, you couldn't run it on an iPhone, and Steve Jobs, said that was our turning point. We will never ever support Flash on our phones. And now you have this great technology with HTML5, which is becoming more and more mature every year, where the tools are getting in place, where the monetization is in place, and where it's very, very comparable to the app stores today in terms of just making a real business out of this one. So I think this is the big difference, plus the 5G coming up.
the things that, I'm sorry, I'm going off on one as usual, but I think your point earlier is actually also vital. The difference in audience, I think, is down to the thing I call mode of use. And I think instant games is a very different medium of kind of like behaviour compared to, say, a native game or a PC console type experience. I think they all have distinct kind of behaviour frameworks and therefore distinct audiences who would choose to adopt those games because of that mode of use.
Exactly, it's a different platform. You know, that's what I was referring to earlier, that a lot of people don't understand this. They believe, hey, I do have a native game, let's put it on instant games, you know, or put it on Snap if they would accept it. But since it is completely different, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of controls and conception and, you know, how to play with your friends, whatever.
It's a different experience.
It's a different experience. You know, that's.
I think the platforms that have been involved in instant gaming have not done a very good job unlocking the power of the platforms to use in the games themselves, and that should be improved.
I mean, it's an early market, right? So.
Well, like I said, this was years ago, right? So, you know, people have had time. So
yeah,
let's do it a little bit better, a little bit faster.
I'm old, you know, I remember the Java days.
Right, I realise it's lunchtime. I'm sure everybody in here is hungry, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to all my panellists. A big round of applause for them, and thank you all for coming to our panel. Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.